I need you to join with me in just a moment of prayer. Creative and loving Spirit, be with each heart, soul, and mind here in this time of worship. May we each be touched and guided by the Spirit within and by the Spirit that brings us together. May those who are grieving, who are ill this morning, find assurance and comfort here. And may those who are struggling in any way find their way to courage, strength, and forgiveness. May we be blessed in this moment by all who have gone before, imagining a better world, imagining a beloved community. Amen. It is said of one of our 19th century Unitarian heroes, the Reverend Theodore Parker, that he was part of the Underground Railroad and protected and helped runaway slaves. And so he literally kept a pistol in behind his pulpit, just in case there were any raids during his sermons. Only 2 such slaves ever were returned to the South under this runaway slave law from Massachusetts, and both times sparked near-riot protests. In this life, or past lives, or those yet to come, I imagine that this kind of circumstance would bring me to bear arms, to keep a pistol handy, to protect the life of a fugitive from an oppression as deep and awful as slavery. Now, if you've seen my pulpit, you know there's not much space to hide anything, but just in case. I want to become that strong in my faith. Parker, like other abolitionists in his time, was not popular for his stand. The opponents, who often benefited directly or indirectly from the institution of slavery, feared war, and they were right. I start with this bit of the story of Theodore Parker today because his thoughts and beliefs about religion, as I've also mentioned before, greatly paved the way to our modern Unitarian Universalist faith. And this month, we are celebrating community and our own religion as one of our sources, which you will always find printed on the backs of our orders of service beneath our 7 principles. As dramatic as Parker's abolitionist stand on slavery was, his stand on religion, inspired in part by the works of Emerson, his elder but contemporary, got him into even more trouble. Parker did not believe that one had to follow Christ to be saved. He believed that Christianity, like all religions, was transient, as he said, only pointing toward the permanent reality of God. He was the first minister to clearly step outside the Christian fold, and the Unitarian churches and ministers of Boston shunned him, making him a heretic even within his own tradition. Nevertheless, a theater was found for his powerful messages, and he drew upwards of 2,000 people on Sundays. Like the Universalists who believed that a God of love would not condemn someone to hell for wrong belief, Parker believed that everyone had a spark of the divine within. Hence our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Like Emerson, he also did not believe in miracles or that God was on some other metaphysical plane, but that God is here and now, whatever God may be, while also being ultimate and beyond our capacity to completely understand or define. God holds the permanent, beautiful morals and virtues, all of which we aspire to, that all religions aspire to, that can only be glimpsed in part. Parker, like most Unitarians and Universalists who joined in 1961 to become one religion, also thought that his message was compatible with Jesus and what he had to say in the Bible, even though it was not compatible with the form of Orthodox Christianity. Because of his essential break with the orthodoxy of his Unitarian faith in Christianity, Parker paved the way for last century and this new one, in which we attempt to build community between those who are on different paths to discover ultimate reality. which creates a radical freedom of belief and freedom to explore our own spirituality, even if it makes us all happy heretics. Right. For those who are new today to our faith, the word heretic simply means one who questions. And our forebears have always questioned and sought the truth behind the teachings of Jesus, the truth in other religious traditions, the truth about the nature of God, and the purpose and meaning of life in the short time that we each have been given upon this earth. We stand today, as Kenny indicated, on the shoulders of some very grand people, like Parker, Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, Margaret Fuller, Olympia Brown, Susan B. Anthony, who was Quaker and Unitarian, Clara Barton, Florence Nightingale, Bronson Alcott, the educator, Albert Schweitzer, who found Unitarianism later in life, Hosea Ballou, Ray Bradbury, E. E. Cummings, Kurt Vonnegut, John Quincy Adams, and John and Abigail Adams, and many, many others. Across time, you can hear the unique, creative, fierce, and free thinking of many of our forebears, along with an often courageous need to make a difference, as well as bring about societal change. As I wrote about earlier this month, one of my personal heroes is Margaret Fuller, who was an early advocate for women's rights and the suffragist movement. She tried to break the chains within the minds of her female contemporaries. Imagine what it was like 150 years ago. She held conversations to encourage them to learn to speak their minds and develop their thoughts on current subjects, philosophy, and theology, things that some people thought they could not think about at the time. Today, Parker and Fuller would ask us, who are we? For what do we stand? How do each of us live out a faithful life? The question Kenny asked us to. After World Wars I and II, many Unitarians and Universalists strayed even further from orthodoxy, being among those who questioned whether religion had done humanity more harm than good. And as we know, religion continues to be one of the undergirding forces for division and strife between peoples. In this faith community, we continue to question what is real and permanent about human values and morals, as opposed to the creedal stands that still pit one religion against another, especially in their more fundamentalist forms. But our use of reason, which we so dearly love, does not simply make us a debate society. We are always working on our understandings so that we might be with those who would continue to work on the ills of our time. The racism that is a legacy of slavery and the Civil War. If you come to our conversation afterwards, you'll learn about Amendment T and what is still in our U.S. and state constitution, as well as the racism between nations and the complicated development of the Western United States after the Mexican War and the wars with the conquering of the indigenous peoples throughout our country. The homophobia and heterosexism that persecutes those who are born different and who live different lives from our societal norms, along with still sexism, classism, and the fact that many children in this country are poor and hungry and homeless, as the board president of Aurora Warms the Night told us at our auction last night. Our faith calls us to provide spiritual support to each person on their faith journey, which is one of the reasons we have shifted our worship and learning format to provide a time of learning, especially through conversation for all of our adults, not just our children. We are called second into community to form the bonds of care that will support each of us in times of need and sorrow. And then, as the end of our mission statement says, we are called to work for justice. You'll always find that printed on the fronts of your orders of service. There are different religious perspectives about public engagement. In the Christian tradition, this is often called the faith versus works controversy. Will your community be focused inwardly on its faith, or take its faith outward and work in the larger world? Unitarian Universalists have always come down squarely on the works side of this argument. As the Apostle James asks in the New Testament, can faith save you? If a brother or sister is naked and lacks food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm, and eat your fill, and yet you do not supply their bodily needs, what is the good of that? Faith by itself, if it has no works, is dead. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I, by my works, will show you my faith. Kenny and I did not coordinate. It is often the case. But didn't you hear that fundamental message in what he said to our children? And don't you hear that now? By my works, I will show you my faith. As my friend, Elder Will Dickerson of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, who is here today to lead us in conversation on the justice amendments on the ballots, would say, James is agitating us. To go beyond the inner life and the community we build to the outer life of works. Yes, it's controversial. Yes, it's difficult, and it is agitating. As Diane Lavender, our awesome administrator, said earlier this week, quoting Reverend Stephen Papa, soon to be Minister Emeritus of the First Universalist Church in Denver, this religion is hard. You cannot be Unitarian Universalist without accepting how hard your faith is going to be, because we are constantly challenging societal norms, whether slavery and the right to vote, or today the rights of the LGBTQ community, or the racism that underlies the poverty and the deaths of so many in the Black, brown, and Native peoples communities. We are called to make a difference. Some of us do this through our jobs and vocations, teaching, social work, counseling, the medical professions, or works in communications, renewable energy, and other businesses that focus on the environment, that would make our air and water cleaner, and address waste and mass consumption and emissions that point to the human cause of global warming and pollution. And some of us do our works as a church community of Unitarian Universalists who go out into the world to stand with friends and allies. This community we have created is a sanctuary meant not to simply shield us and protect us from the world, but to support us in all our many battles and work in the world. This is where we come to renew our spirits. This is a hard faith and a bold one. It requires of us our biggest, largest selves, not our smallest. Thinking of the plight of slaves, the poor, and the subjugation of women, Parker once said in an 1840 sermon, "A reformation will scarcely suit me. It must be a revolution that sets the world right." In one of Parker's sermons against slavery, he said he wanted a democracy of all the people, by all of the people, for all the people. President Lincoln used this quote in writing the Gettysburg Address. In one of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s most famous and often quoted speeches, "Where do we go from here?" he wrote, "The arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice." King learned about Parker as he studied at Boston University's seminary. And Coretta Scott King later told an African-American colleague of mine, Rosemary Bray McNatt, now the president of our Starr King School of the Ministry, that Reverend King fell in love with Unitarians and considered changing his faith. But he knew he needed to be embedded in the Black Christian church to become a voice for his people. Studying, he found what Parker had said 100 years earlier. "I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eyes reach but a little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by the experience of sight. I can divine it only by conscience. And from what I see, I am sure it bends toward justice. We are on that moral arc, walking slowly, stumbling often, inching forward only a bit. But without faith in a better world, the possibilities of what we could do together, the determination to work for our own liberation and of those of others, the determination to point ourselves toward life-giving, beloved community instead of fear and isolation, we would not move forward even a tiny centimeter. May each of us in our own ways find ourselves together and hand in hand on the arc of conscience, the arc of the sacred, and may we bend ourselves toward justice, for this is who we are. Amen. To support this community, which we grew some today, I ask that you think of it in your hearts as we receive our morning's offering.